first of all, thank all of you who come, I'm sure some of you from a great distance for making this effort. Some of you were with us last evening to share with us the wonderful talk that Gail Buckley by 65. And I have to say, for those who have missed it, that will be on tape, videotape. We also have a copy of her talk, which is a very scholarly message. We're very, very proud of Gail for that research. And for her sharing of that with all of us. I think this is the remarkable thing about Oakwood and about the times of Alumni Weekend, the occasions that bring us back together here in this room. The occasion to share not only some of our memories of the sweet times and difficult times, things we remember sharing in the past, but also an opportunity to see what the possibilities for Oakwood might be now in the 90s and going into the next century. Because we are an ongoing family of this. It's a long history, a very proud history. And through its history, it has fulfilled a very important mission. And the affirmation of that mission, then we find wonderful people like you return to the school with gifts like the one that Gail shared with us last night. We feel that Oakwood's mission is to spawn ideas, good people, help them to go out in the world and spread that mission. And so one of the purposes of coming together today is for each of you to bring your gift, tell us something of your life and what it's meant to you for having been at Oakwood. Share that with us and take the gifts that Oakwood gives so freely and lovingly back with you. Come back to Oakwood many, many times, come home. I have found this a very important part of my growing up, to come back and to see again what could be done and what is being done is going to school. I'd like to introduce to you two people on the Alumni Council who really are responsible for organizing today's event and tomorrow. And Lisa Ellis, the president of the 69, and Marcia Lehmeyer, the president of the board. She's a young county. Marcia has agreed to clerk this meeting, and so
into the moment of silence. You can use this time to think about, I know for me, this room brings back a tremendous number of memories. And as I continue to come back to Alumni Day, those memories are really, when I was an Oakwood student, I remember sitting here and listening to the clock and thinking on my adolescent thoughts, usually full of turmoil, anxiety, romance, nervousness, all kinds of things. And now I'm here to share those memories of those times and it's a tremendously moving experience. So I hope you all will take this time to reflect, to share the rest of us memories of your experiences.
'68, '69, '70, this all was war was raging and so was protest staging. Yeah, I agree with that for sure. Polarization was pretty heavy on this campus too, though. So this room was everywhere. All the time, shouting matches. I don't remember anybody getting anybody, so that didn't work out.
I have sort of a double reunion. My 50th is impossible. But it's great to see you bring back the my hundredth friend on the night. 6 years that I was here. It's great to see them. There's a lot of memories, a lot of people. I really enjoy being back and seeing you all. I remember the class in 1935. There are several of us lined up here on the bench this morning. When I came in the room this morning, Marshall Sutton, I came in the room and as a senior, I sat over in that corner there where I used to try to do some Latin, work on some trigonometry and solid geometry. And it was very tempting to sort of go over and try to go over that corner of the room. But the desks are gone. It's very different here. It's meaningful to sit in the silence and to hear that clock, even though it's not ticking loudly. You can hear that special tone, that quality it has. We had meeting for worship here every Sunday. Faculty would be up here, and William Reagan was the headmaster, and some of us had it timed. We'd sometimes bet on when Will Reagan would get up and speak. It's about 10:20. I remember the sweet cherry trees that used to be up in where the old apple orchard was, and yes, one night I went out about 1 o'clock in the morning and sat in one of those trees and had some cherries, and I don't think anyone knew about it for a long time. I think the backstop for the baseball diamond is about in the same place, and there was one occasion I'll not forget. I hit a ball that almost reached the gym, and I was able to go around the bases. There are some deeper things that are on my spirit also. I remember more now than when I was here, the quality of the community that was here. I felt the freedom in meeting for worship one morning when I was a senior. My mother was very ill, the family was going through some difficult times. I felt very much alone. But I also felt the freedom to just arise briefly and share what was on my heart. I remember that experience. I remember being ill at home one time and missing a lot of the trigonometry lessons. And at that time we had, the New York State had Regents exams, and I was worried about what I'd do on that exam. And I remember coming back, and I remember Henry Nace giving me time and attention on that trigonometry, and I came through with a 9 the following exam. I don't know how I did it, but it was primarily because of Henry and that help that I got. COVID has some very special meaning to me. It literally did turn around my life. I received some ideals here I was not aware of at the time when I was here. But I'm very much aware that the roots of much of that began here. It's meaningful to be here this morning.
I remember this room also as study hall. I had forgotten about the desk until I got to the room, and I remember exactly where mine was, so I guess we were in alphabetical order. But I remember also in late May, those windows were all open, and great big June was coming in. So, and it's pretty hard to concentrate. Those are the kinds of memories that come back, and that come back to like this morning, and I don't think I've been back. Well, my sister's ready, which wants, but actually not. It's quite mysterious.
I'm Charlie Bergman. I was in class in 1950 here. And this room does indeed look very different. And sitting here and looking across the room at Paul's River, I remember this room, among other things, was a place of refuge where after we were harassed Mrs. Newland by various pranks and jokes, for which I now ask forgiveness. Paul and I would retreat in here. This was a safe house for the unspeakable things that we did as she had her typewriting class. I also remember, and I am a little embarrassed, but perhaps this is a rather personal vignette, that I always appreciated the cleanliness and the quiet of Joe Shane's bathroom, which was just up the steps and around the corner. And I never liked using the facilities downstairs. So for 2 years, I considered that my private bathroom, much to the consternation of Joe Shane, who only was the headmaster and wanted those private facilities for himself. But on a more serious note, I came to the school at a time in my life when I needed nurturing and understanding and receptivity to the fact that in many ways I felt very different from other people. I wasn't a good athlete, and I needed to have a venue to establish some sort of identity and place in the sun. And a remarkable group of people, including some of my peers here today, were very loving and very nurturing and enormously supportive in helping me to learn something about loving and relating, sharing, feeling, and communicating. And my life since then has had some rather beautiful and dramatic privileges associated with loving and giving and relating. I am in philanthropy, and my life's work now is helping other people throughout the world. I think some of the legacy and some of the privilege of my present life was honed and refined in this strange and bizarre and wonderful place that is Oakland. So I too am very moved to be back here.
I'm Emily Taylor, and from the standpoint of a student, faculty member, a parent, a few other things, I've had a connection with this school forever and ever. One thing that has come to my mind as these people have been speaking is a miracle that happened one time when I was teaching here. And a boy who was needing desperately to catch Latin to get into Dartmouth, and I worked on old Regents examination papers before the exams. And he was feeling a little iffy about it, and what could I do except that? I came into this room where the examination was given, and And I don't know how I can remember reaching them, but they were bad. And we opened up the exam paper, had a very exact same passage that we had worked on in court was on that exam. That was a miracle. He got it, and he went to medical school, and he's been a most successful surgeon in Poughkeepsie. Jim Reed, I don't know how many people like that here today. But so many things you remember about open experiences. I put a snake in the teacher's drawer one time. And I don't remember the critical happened after that.
Stand up, I'm on class of 30, and it seems to me we're facing the wrong direction, we should be facing that way. Bill Hall used to sit right there, and I sat right over there. And I remember we had a very remarkable faculty. They were all young, and they had an impossible assignment. They not only had to have classes during the week, but they had to see that we stayed out of mischief on the weekend, and they had to plan activities for us. I remember hiking down to the Hudson River, and picnics down there. And I remember well the time the faculty put on the play, You Can't Take It With You. Remember that? So many things, as you said, all are said from that. It's wonderful opportunity.
I'm going to use the temptation because I didn't plan to say anything. My mom sent me from 35. It was only, for 1 year. But in some ways, I'm a little more intimately associated with this room than I had remembered, because those of us that were poor students, hopefully not scholastically, but as poor students, had to work for our either in the dining hall or someplace, and it was my job every night after study hall to sweep this building. I'm sorry, to sweep the study hall, it was this room. So I get back to my dormitory room after lights were out. And I swept this thing a good many times around all those desks. Another thing that comes to mind, being from the country, and I hated to dress up. And in those times, there was a regulation that you couldn't go to supper. They call it dinner here, I call it supper. You couldn't go to dinner without a necktie on. Well, we didn't have much money at home. We didn't have a lot of I don't remember how much neckties I had, but I know I didn't have very many, and I thought they were an instrument of the devil, and I didn't want to wear them anyway. So I went to Will Reagan and said, I don't want to wear a necktie to supper, or we haven't got very many, and I'm not going to spend a lot of money on neckties. He said, well, maybe we can take care of that. And he went home and rummaged around and found out things that somebody had given him for Christmas for the last 40 years. He gave me about a half a dozen neckties. So that spoiled that. I had to wear a necktie. And I might say I think I kept some of those neckties for at least 10 or 15 years and wore them out.
Susan, 1956. I came to Oakland at the time, but I was having a really hard time in my life. After the first year, I wasn't asked back. It was a real shock to me. But Oakland hadn't realized how much torment I was going through. And when they found out, they let me come back. They really nurtured me through that time. And it was a real turnaround for me. The memory that's coming to me today, though, is one time when it was a study hall. We were sitting right around that post late one Saturday evening singing songs. A whole bunch of us, including Sarah and I. I think part of why I'm remembering it is because I'd always been shy, I'd always been on the outside of things, and this time Sarah and I were the ringleaders. And I remember Joyce, the history listener, saying, one more song. And we made that song last about 45 minutes.
My name is Lou Resnick, I'm Charlie Bird, the smartest guy this last night. So perhaps some of my memories so but I, the first few minutes we were here, we kind of quieted down. I think it was the first time since 1950 that I was aware of my stomach juices. And I was thinking about meetings and so forth, which I haven't been in since 1950. And I think my greatest memory of Sunday morning meetings was after one of these meetings with some like troublesome faculty around here. The very famous Mrs. Newell got up, and for the first time in my life I understood what life is all about, because she told everyone assembled that necking was above the neck and petting was below. And so, that philosophy for 40 years. Jane, who was the headmaster of the local I was here, was, along with the fellow named Bill Butterfield, they were the two men who took my life. I was again one of these somewhat misfits that arrives in trouble. Not quite sure who I was and where I was going. But Joe Shane, despite the fact that I was terrible about for example, said if you get 60% in this final exam, you'll graduate. Well, I fooled him, I got 65. Joe Shane was probably more responsible than anybody for allowing me to find myself without creating enormous pressure. Bill Butterfield was the athletic director, fostered in me a sense of myself that I still have and will always be greater than him before. And lastly, I think the most important thing that I can say about him is that when my daughter came along, he needed a school. It's open that she came. When she graduated, she has become a very happy person. So that's played a major part of my memories. And yes, being in this room, many memories. It's nice to be there.
I have to refer to some of my classmates' memories. Number one, Marshall mentioned Henry Nace. Henry Nace was a great guy. We all loved him dearly, but we couldn't resist torturing him a bit. These desks, the fixed desks that were lined up here in the study hall, had little metal pieces that, hinges, I guess, of the seats or something. Anyhow, one night when Charlie, as we used to call Mr. Nace, was officiating at some study hall, somebody started clicking a metallic sound to the little metal piece. And it spread, and it spread, and it spread until we just had a whole symphony of click, 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 click. I don't remember what finally happened, but anyhow, we did. When that symphony was sweeping the room, my roommate and I, up in Slats Alley, I forget the number, room 13. Very significant. Could look through the window, see this look like the way it is, through that window and see Bob sweeping away and study hall. I've had 3 Oakwood careers. My first 4 years, from 1931 to 35, I was a student. From 1961 till 1970, which included some of the most tumultuous years of Oakwood's history, as somebody has already mentioned, I was a parent of 3 people who are all, I see one over there and one over there, and I think the other one hasn't arrived yet. Okay. All who graduated from Oakwood eventually. And then my next Oakwood career was as a member of the board for 10 years, 1978 to 1988, something like that. So I feel as though I go through cycles in Oakwood. I don't know what the next cycle is. I don't even know how we're going to come to Oakwood. She lives in North Carolina.
My name is Mary Henry. I came to Oakwood in the fall of 1946. The surgeon on my ground study said that all clothing was marked. My grandmother, my mother, and my aunt spent the summer before marking all my clothes with my initials for M.W. When I arrived at Oakwood, my name was Buick. And it showed for Mary Robert. I came to Oakwood from Washington, D.C. I was an only child, and I was being educated in the segregated school system. My parents wanted to not only companionship, but I could have a home in the neighborhood, but also have an education. Julie's pregnant, I guess I have to tell it since I'm sure and she's not going to tell it all. My parents wrote to half a dozen boarding schools. This was not the pattern of our family's life. And they asked about a place for a little colored girl in the 9th grade. They have, my father still has, he's 88 today, and he still has letters from 5 of those boarding schools saying that we would be glad to have a colored girl in perhaps the sophomore or junior year, but not for the 9th grade because we feel our students must get used to the community and it's too difficult for them in that first year. Oakwood wrote and said, bring her up. We came up in the spring about this time of year, and it seemed the most amazing place I had ever been. I come out and explained how dramatic the wrench was to come from being an only child. I never spent a night away from home. No sleepovers, no babysitting, nothing. And I cried for 3 months. I ran Kleenex under my eyeglasses. Tears could not fall on every paper folder. I was rather impatient with my tears. She was more impatient with my lack of skill in math. I went home at Thanksgiving and Christmas, and I knew I could not go home again. This place became for me perhaps the most important single place I did. I was here. And looking back, it was more important than college or any other major changes I made in my life. I teach English at Mount William College, and when people ask what I teach, I very often say I teach the literature of the dispossessed, because I was trained in traditional British American literatures. I teach African American literature. I teach Irish literature. I teach narrative writing in almost every form, including autobiography. I'm getting ready next year to teach a course in historical fiction. One of the things I want the students to begin to look at is the way in which we cast values at a point in time, and look at another period of history through the lens of our own time. I think it's interesting that we've come together. This is the first time I've really been inside at Oakwood since I left here. I've been to the campus twice. The idea that we would come together, those of us, my friends who are here, that we would come together at this point in our lives and be able to look back at the events that we are now, seems to me to have some kind of prominence attached to it. Because we are now at the point where we have more time to get together, more time to do things perhaps more. I look across this together and I think about all of the faces and friends in the past. I think about this little right arm, that wretched sword that was such a delight in hiding. Come back and mention these names, and no, I was not there when that study hall that made that noise, but I was at another study hall that names and many other ones that made great noise. I think one of the important things for me is that we learned kind of joyfulness through the way we took up life here, and aside from meditation, very great. the discipline which I think somehow we learned to take on ourselves. I think that was a joyfulness in my spirit, and that's what makes us human. And I haven't mentioned that now, it's called force, because that is one of the things that I think we need more of that's on the world. This isn't just the companionship and French teachings we have now. There was a joyfulness about living no matter how hard it was. This was a safe haven where it was possible to know the joy and the beauty as well as the hardship. And I think that one of the things we want to remember, what I particularly remember is that I came here, and essentially a haven from the world in order to go back to the world and do better there. I guess I would want us all to share that joyfulness as well as all the other things that we're experiencing.
Just for the sake of historical perspective, it's time to hear from the children. Keith Morgan Bailey, class of 1980. I've seen, I think, one other person from my class, and that was a shock. I'll catch up with her later. I say historical perspective, everybody who's spoken so far has had at least a message of arriving troubled and leaving feeling like more of a whole person. And my story is, of course, similar. I won't bore you with it. I was a horrible adolescent. I don't know how anybody else could stand me. My family had always told me I was great. And it's like nobody else in the world had. Discovered on coming to Oakwood that they were willing to give me the benefit of the doubt. That's perhaps the most important gift I think Oakwood has given many of us. You arrive a child and you may leave a child, but they sure have tried to allow you to prove otherwise.
I'm Susan Chocolates Messmer. Peter Messmer is my husband, and he's a graduate of Oakwood. I didn't have the privilege of being a student here, but I returned with Peter in 1970, shortly after we were married. And Peter started the shop program here while I worked in a dugout. My daughter Hillary was born while we were here. I too arrived as a very troubled person. But it was here that I learned to understand the sense of community and to begin to be able to share with people. And I've carried that with me. I'm still struggling with those ideals, but it was a very important experience. I remember in particular Sundays here in Oakland. I didn't really understand the meaning. I was raised a Catholic, and so there was always a lot of commotion at church, a lot of standing and sitting and dealing, and there were sermons. And I had to learn what it meant to sit quietly and be a member of a group without saying anything or doing anything. And I'm beginning to understand that now. We went to meetings on Sunday. I tried very hard to understand, and then I remember we went to the dining hall to have brunch prepared by Dorothy Alpha's group. And my husband Peter and Rick Swigert were among that band of crazies back then who lived in the dorms. Peter was the residence hall director. Rick was the dean of boys. And after brunch, I remember that there were lots of sports on television. Rick would order an anchovy pizza and come over and sit on an easy chair that we had that was covered in green plastic. And had a little candle, three-legged candle stand. Rick would put his pizza on the candle stand and cheer on the teams, rocking his table back and forth, stomping his feet, eating anchovy pizza. And I remember that with a lot of fondness. I always worried about those little tables, but he never broke one. And I'm glad to be with you here today. My 25th class reunion was this fall. I grew up in a community outside Philadelphia, and I don't feel any more a part of that class now than I did when I was in high school, but I feel that I've shared an awful lot with you folks. And I thank you for what you brought to me today and for letting me share a little bit with you.
since we went to class in 1980. And Oakland was really the first place where I experienced unconditional love and family and felt accepted and cared for. And it took me some time to start caring for myself and accepting myself unconditionally as a result. It was such a shock to me to just be loved for who I was. And being in this room and hearing Keith, I just remembered that we played opposite each other in Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf in this room. And being the pushiest Martha I could have possibly been, I pushed him and I nearly knocked him across those benches over there. We did it in the round. It was amazing. And I have a lot of memories in this room. I think this is where I first started to talk to God and formulate for myself what God was to me. Oakland was the beginning of a long and gradual and continuing transformation for me, where I really learned that I had something to contribute in this world and began to give it freely and to receive love from other people that was pure and true and unconventional. And it's so great to be back here.
God make me feel very strong.
I began as a day school taxi, my second parent, both parents died at that point. So what comes back is important was this critical time of life happened.
Pete Messimer, I was referred to a minute ago. A real surprise that Susan spoke to you because she usually tells me before I must speak in public, don't tell them any more stories about your high school days. Well, she's spoken, and since I'm back here, I figure that you may at least understand the stories, which very few other people do. This room, to me, in my experience at Oakwood, this was always a meeting room. And as well as Sunday meeting, we had a weekday meeting, which I think was on Wednesday. And there were two things about this this room that I remember very much. One was the clock, which I missed the ticking. The other was the light, which changed with the seasons. I am partially colorblind. So I don't pick up on color, but I can pick up on light intensity. And I could have told the seasons by the light in this room. I want to share with you a story I've inflicted on others, but I think you'll understand. From the spring of 1962, when I was a first-year student, Rick Swaggart was a senior. It was a weekday meeting, and spring, and it had that funny bright but cold light that you get here in the Hudson Valley, late February, March. And I think that the Cold War and the atomic bomb was something that was very much on our minds. My big brother, Tom DeWitt, classmate of Rick's, rose to share with the group a very pessimistic poem, I'm sure inspired by the Cold War era, talking about how terrible the condition of man was. This went on for several minutes, and it was a downer, no doubt about it. And he sat, and the clock was ticking away, tick-tock, and you could not even hear anyone breathe. And Paul Taylor, esteemed teacher of mathematics, stood. Paul wasn't very tall, but he had a very tall, magnificent, very tall white hair. Magnificent. He had a presence. He didn't need to do anything. He just had to be there with the hair. He had a great presence. But he did choose to tell us a story. And this was a response to Tom DeWitt's negative poetry. He told a story that you've heard probably several times about the two frogs in the pail of milk, which was right on target. I don't know why other people don't understand this story, but it was a story of a farmer who was making a delivery of a pail of milk, and two frogs ended up in the pail for some reason. And the frogs are in there, and the one frog says, "This is a desperate situation, and I don't know what to do. It's really terrible. I'm not used to milk. This is an awful situation," and sinks to the bottom and drowns. The other frog said, "Well, this is pretty unusual, and I don't know whether I can make it, but I'm going to start swimming." So by the time the delivery was made, of course, the second, more optimistic frog was sitting on a nice slab of butter, leap out of the pail and make his way into the future. That to me was Oakwood. It was. It was the downer part. It was being very concerned about whether it was the Cold War and the atomic bomb or the concerns of today. And it was knowing he had to be like the second frog and start swimming. And that is the part that people who have not been part of Oakwood don't understand. They don't understand swimming until you've got your slab of butter.
One of the things that I've heard everybody comments on the clock. Back in 1950, I'm another classmate from about 1950, the school day ended at 3:23 and 20 seconds. After that, it run to 3:23. And then if you waited, if you knew what you were doing, count on your watch, you wait until about 16 seconds after, because you knew at 20 after, the bell would go off and everybody could leave. We all wanted out, always wanted out early. So about 4 seconds ahead of time, there was a group of us, Bill Drury, Andy Capel, some other names, people that all figured that clock out. We'd all get up and we'd start the door. The teacher up at the front would look up and start to say. It never failed to support it. I think the thing that has pleased me so much is to see the people and see what's done. People in my class, and I know Mrs. Taylor. Everybody for what they have done with themselves as a result of that's wonderful.
You'll excuse me for speaking again. I'm Esther Carrington, Painehill. And I owe a big deal to Oakwood, and I felt I must say something about it. Number one, I was born in Union Springs, across from Oakwood School, and my father was teaching at Oakwood. He was principal at Oakwood School for a period I do not know, I think 2 years. And then when Oakwood moved to Dixon, our family remained in Union Springs. And I was delighted this morning to come in. I was looking at all these name tags. Everybody looked like kids. I couldn't see very many here, 30. And I read a name tag that said 1921. This gentleman right over here. And he remembered my father, Louisa Carrington. So I did want to tell you that, but not many people here, I'm sure, that remember that Oakwood used to be Union Springs. So I'm thinking of that. One of the great things they enjoyed doing there, they had a toboggan. And Oakwood was on top of a hill. They could, a group of students can get on the toboggan and go right down the hill almost to the lake. And I remember once when I was about 5 years old, My dad.
And I'm arguing that my, I'm not a graduate, but my husband Allison was a graduate, and I have 2 children that are graduates coming from here. I have to get in on this discussion about the clock. I have prepared clocks for about 20 years. It was a long period of time back, no, these, 5 years and beyond that, to know that. But that clock would run, and I tried to, talk to someone doing something about it. I didn't want to hear. Somehow that TikTok well, eventually things changed around, and they came when I was allowed to take that clock. Well, first we tried to see it. So I listened to it, and I know there's a room down below someplace, rubber down there, it's so full of wires you can't move. And what wire had gone to this, harness the electricity, nobody seemed to know. So I got this wall down, this clock down on the wall, and took it home. And it had to have a transformer, which I tried to order from a company, and they'd say, well, they wouldn't make one of that time for 3 or 4 months. But I went to a place that, Kingston, that had surplus stuff, and I got a transformer there, and I cleaned it, and I got it all safe. I'm going, I brought it home. So I brought it down and had it cut it up, and it's run pretty much ever since. And I have to apologize for the fact that it's not running today. I made a man to get down during this week and get that clock going. Things were pretty busy for me, and I didn't quite make it, but I'm telling you, come back next week and you'll hear it.
My name is Dwight Stan Wilson. I am not a graduate of this school. I spent 7 years here and never graduated. I worked here until this past year as a dean of students and as an instructor. One of the things that I learned while being here, many of you have highlighted, apparently there's an extremely high percentage of little wretches. And I was interviewing a candidate for the headmaster's position at the school that I work at now. And at one point, he thought he had said something extremely wise, and he leaned back so that he could be congratulated. And I found that I had to elder him. He said it is impossible to discipline students and be friends to students at the same time. And I told him that's crazy. And he found himself having to not only backtrack but try to apologize because he was not in a position where he could argue. This past week, the seniors at Morristown Friends School where I work decided they were going to take a senior cut day. Which happens to be against my religion as a dean. And I was at a conference at the time, and when I came back, I was told, spoke with the headmaster, and he said, you know, you should just look the other way. And I said, it's not part of me to look the other way when kids are broken. And I explained to the seniors that they were going to have to work from 9 to 12 today, whether or not the sun was shining, pulling weeds. And to my amazement, yesterday afternoon, walking out of the office on my way home, I knew they'd been arguing for 3 weeks as to who was going to be their speaker at commencement. And when I was going out the door, one of them said, guess who's going to speak at commencement? You are. That was not a penalty. It was an amazing honor that I don't, if they had asked me how I felt about it, I would have told them that if you're considering me, I don't think it's fair to the other teachers to have someone new come in and ask that person to speak. But it highlighted that you can discipline kids and still be friends. And many of you have been disciplined more than you will ever tell your children or grandchildren at this very institution. But at the same time, you're being disciplined by people who consider themselves friends of yours. You were able to help them learn how to love and be there for themselves. I express my gratitude for the 7 years that I spent here, even if it came after some of you were little rascals. But I see a couple of miles up here who I helped to rear. I'm glad for that opportunity.
The clock. When I was a student here, the clock wasn't working, and the clock was, for the several years that I was here, stopped at 10:20, and 10:20 was precisely the time that community meeting ended. So I always thought that was sort of significant, and thought that was the time that the clock was supposed to be stopped at. So when they finally got the clock running again, I thought that maybe that was wrong. But I sort of thought that it was there to remind us that that was the time the meeting ended.
Josh Walden, class of 78. One of the things that Oakwood always meant to me was community. And I think one of the things that Oakwood taught me was about spirituality. And I'm a dancer choreographer in New York City now. And I think one of the things that I take with me from this room is an inner strength.
The lines and the notion of every Oakwood student is that troubled person. I think our experiment back in 46, the problem was back in 46. I came to Oakwood as a happy camper. My family was desperate to actually leave New York City in 1943 because youngsters were forming gangs and they were getting guns from their older brothers who were in the service. And my parents thought it was unseemly for me to go growing in my life. So they sort of saved the paper. I came here with a notion of belonging to St. Martin. University boys have, which is that I was smarter than anybody else. Coolest basketball player in the world. And I learned a little bit about people. Talk about some of those. One, I learned a little bit that race is important, but it wasn't critical. It could be who you want to be and not the content, not that. I learned that you had to be wits about you. I remember being with you, Captain Taylor. He's not only my math teacher, but my coach, whose most violent curse word or phrase was, "Tell money." And he tried to dissuade me the first year from playing basketball like a gold trucker. And I thought that was the only way to play basketball. He carried that tension to me in the classroom. I remember, I don't know if you played anything exactly, but I remember conning him into thinking that I didn't have the lesson, I wasn't prepared, because I gaze out of the window and daydream. And he loved to catch me in the basketball. Austrian constant with the formula for the isosceles triangle. He'd say,
Give him the answer, snap. Who is mine? I'm an attorney now, and to some extent, I think I'm an attorney because William J. Reagan told me that I had to recite. I think it was the second month I was here. And I did not have any sense that anyone could stand in front of me and say things. But what if I got me to do it? And to this day, I remember standing on the stage that was there, reciting strictly antiseptic, strictly germ by all that. Antiseptic. And I did it, and it was terrific. Sometimes when I'm working in an appeal, I think about that moment and say, thanks. I remember this is the place where you could compete without cheating. That's the good step. I remember this is the place where you have to rise from hurt. Nobody knows his name, but the name is Tony Sinabaldi. They have back for him, I think it was I. All the shots. It gives me a tap. I thought I was dead, but I got up and I was going to touch on it the next play. And I remember that because you have to get on the best of something. Going up. I also remember this is a place where you could disagree without being disagreeable. That's an important lesson. It's especially important for Christians. Well, and finally, many people said, this is a place where you did have community, even or silent communication. As a single person, you never listen to I will be forever grateful for the years I spent.
My name is Jim Promoter. I'm from the class of '65. First of all, I'm not going to talk about the clock. I think everybody's covered that fairly well. I was a day student here, so I wasn't involved in too much extracurricular activities. I do have two memories involving two of the teachers. One of them happened to be Paul Taylor, my math teacher, our math teacher. One time when the class was a little bit disruptive, he just stopped for a moment and said, "How is a class like a car?" And then he had to remind us this was something that dated back to when he was a student and the cars were Model Ts. And he gave the answer, since nobody in the class knew it, and it was very simply, they were both full of a bunch of little nuts with a big old crank up front. Imagine that coming from Paul Taylor in his dark suit, white hair, and just a little sneaky smile. But the other incident I remember was when we were putting on our senior play, which, as I recall, was supposed to be A Midsummer Night's Dream. Fred Royal, one of the English teachers, was our faculty advisor and director. And to him, it was becoming a daytime nightmare. Nobody could seem to get their lines right. Fortunately, I wasn't one of the actors. I was half the lighting crew, a third of the prop crew, and a quarter of the stage crew. He listed me as stage director in the program. But the incident I remember was when one of the actors could not get his lines right at all. It was to the point where he was going to, where Mr. Royal was going to have him have the script right on stage practically to do it. And he went into a small rage and was screaming, "This is going to be the end. You can't do anything right." And he basically gave a little, he was humiliating everybody, and he was humiliated. He was really down in the dumps, and he went back to the back of the auditorium and sat down as if to be extremely depressed. Well, just as that was starting, I had to go back. I was going back to check with him on one of the props, and I cautiously approached him to ask him, and my first words to him are, "Mr. Royal, are you okay?" And he looked up with a little smile on his face, a gleam in his eye, and he was chuckling. And if you were paying attention to what was happening on stage, the actor was getting his lines right. At that moment, I remembered something which apparently everybody else in the auditorium had forgotten, and that was that Mr. Royal's previous profession was a British actor.
I want to thank you all for sharing really wonderful stories. Now it's time to move on. And the first move, for those of you who are reading classes, there will be class photographs, not by the chance of the weather is milky, but in the old library. And afterwards, lunch will be served in tent. I'm told that those of you who don't show up with your class pictures will be denied lunch, so I can. Thank you.
Excuse me, just one moment. The new library, which is almost complete, is going to be available for you to see inside. Between now and about 1:30, Jack Hunter will be there. Front door will be open. Please make yourself welcome. Understand that what is in there is simply the shell of the building that's 98% complete. And the paint that's on them, everything is dry at this point. But you will all be personally responsible for any misfortunes you know. So please do welcome.
That's great.
Mention Mr. Peter.